All right. Still a lot of people logging in, but we're going to get started right here on time. Again, thanks for taking the time out of your day. I have with us Mark Thomas, Governance, Risk, and Compliance Luminary, who's going to talk a bit with us about the most important component to a governance system, people. Something that certainly resonates very big with me and why I've spent my time working in skill and competency development. And with that, I'm going to pass it right over to Mark. And we're going to dive in about 30 minutes. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat. I can't guarantee we're going to answer every one of them, but if you have anything in there you'd like us to discuss or talk about, if we don't follow up with you right in the webinar, we'll follow up with you offline. Mark? All right.
There we go. I think you got me finally.
Are.
Can you hear me there? So, of course, I hit the wrong button and everything disappears on me, and I have to kind of go back in and reset everything. John, thank you very much for the kind introduction and to my friends and partners as Skills TX. Everything sounds good on your end, John? If it is, I'm going to keep moving on.
Absolutely perfect.
Okay, let's do this then. All right, so I'm really excited about this topic because if you think about it, everybody's digitally transforming today, right? And so now with everybody trying to do this digital transformation, now all of a sudden, we're seeing this heightened awareness around governance because everybody's starting to find that, hey, wait a second, we need to make sure that we have the proper policies and the rules and procedures and those kinds of things in place. But let me tell you a little bit about a few stories that I've got, both as a CIO as well as with multiple clients that I've worked at and with recently. And that's a whole idea of having people involved. So this was me as a CIO. I didn't know where to go. And I have a lot of organizations have the same issue. They say, hey, look, we're having this challenge of optimizing our governance framework, but for some reason, we're not getting the value out of this. And I will tell you what happens is you don't have the proper set of what I call the ingredients for your governance system. And what do I mean by ingredients, right? So you put together a meal and you have this recipe. And this recipe calls for certain ingredients. And what happens is if you have the wrong ingredients or if you're missing an ingredient, that may result in undesirable outcomes. So you're going to hear me talking about these things called governance components, and I think those are the ingredients for any of the governance system. And what I've found is this variable, this ingredient called people, skills, and competencies. Folks, you can have all the policies, you can have your processes straight, you can have your boards, your committees, but if you don't have the right skills and competencies in your organization, I can guarantee you, I'm calling it Mark's Law, your governance system will not yield what you expect it to create because you're missing the proper skills out there. So based on that, here's some things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about these core elements or these ingredients of a governance system. And I do want to link in why I believe people, skills, and competencies are an important ingredient to that system. And then finally, let's take a look at how organizations today are really leveraging two frameworks and multiple frameworks, but from the perspective of this presentation, COBIT and SFIA, on how you can really put those together as a very powerful governance system. So I know we have 30 minutes. I have a lot of stuff to talk about, so let's jump right in. And this is not a COBIT class, but let me tell you a little bit about COBIT. Previously known as Control Objectives for Information and Related Technologies, it's finally really escaped the whole idea that it was for cybersecurity or security and audit only. Today, really, it is viewed as kind of a holistic governance system out there. I'm not going to put you through a whole course of COBIT, but I want to give you a couple of key points because there are some pieces here that I think are important for us. Of course, it's principles based like any good framework or good method should have. And we have these things called components. Now, don't worry. These components that you see right here, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you about how those components play a big role. And you'll see one right there called people, skills, and competencies. Of course, we have these things called governance and management objectives. We'll bring that in for you here in just a few minutes. And we have design factors. I actually love that. That's how we create a tailored governance system, folks. I'll bring this back in for you when I give you some suggestions and some advice here in just a little bit. And then that was very, very fast on COBIT. But here's what's interesting. We talked about those components. Remember, I told you earlier that your governance system has to have the proper set of ingredients. Okay. If you were to ask me in my organization, how is your governance system set up? I would say I would have the following 7 ingredients to my governance system. Of course, I need to have processes, right? I need to have organizational structures, things like my committees, my levels of authority, and so on. It's all about information flows through the processes and through those structures. A key one for me that I tell you is an ingredient that most people miss is people skills and competencies. Of course, my principles, policies, procedures, culture, ethics, behavior, and then finally my services and my infrastructure and applications. But let's do this. Let's start to take a look at how people, specifically how the SFIA framework really plays a vital role here. So I'm going to cover 2 components for you today. I'm going to cover the process component, and then, of course, we'll cover the people, skills, and competencies component. But under this process component, and you might be aware of this, the COBIT framework has 40 processes, and those are aligned with what we call governance and management objectives. The goal here isn't to teach that to you, but I want you to be aware of that because we're going to look at one here in just a second. That's 5 domains, and of course, every one of those processes, they're further broken down into practices and activities, metrics, and so on. So under those processes, again, there's my 40 processes. You notice they're broken down into these 5 domains. An interesting piece here is I'm going to draw a line, that red line that I just drew, the objectives to the left of that are my governance side, to the right of that are management. Okay, so kind of an interesting point here, but let's focus on one that I think is really important for us, and that's what I call APO07, and that's what we call managed human resources. Now we're looking at it from a process perspective first. One of the things I want to share with you is that every one of these that you see here, these are called those governance and management objectives. They are also viewed as a process as well. So we're going to take a look. I'm going to take you into a live dive into a COBIT document that'll show you for each one of these, it is broken down into every one of my ingredients for us. Okay. All right. So I know we're moving quick. Hang in there because we're going to jump into this APO07 managed human resources. One of the things that COBIT does for me, which I really like, is it gives me a description and it gives me a purpose statement of that process. The description basically says, hey, what it does. And the purpose statement says why it exists. I do have an auditing background, so I love the purpose statements, which if I'm looking at a purpose statement, when I'm looking at the, at the assurance that this process is behaving the way it's supposed to be, I want to make sure that it is achieving its purpose statement. So that's the first thing we have under the processes, under APO7. Remember, I told you that every one of these processes is broken down further into what we call practices, right? So you'll see here, there are 6 practices under APO7 managed human resources. We'll take a look at them in the live document. You'll see over here APO701, which is acquire and maintain appropriate staffing, identify key personnel, make sure that I have the proper skills and competencies, assess, recognize, and reward their performance, of course, track that usage, and of course, manage my contract staff. Each one of these is going to be broken down into multiple activities. Okay. All right. So one of the interesting things here is when we launched COBIT, we said, well, how do we find the right knowledge and the skills and the competencies to link these back to the COBIT framework? And ISACA chose SFIA as one of those primary frameworks for us. Okay. All right. So I want to make that link because they're, COBIT is not so arrogant to think that it's the only framework in town. COBIT links back and says, hey, we're going to give you information to this point, but from here, you need to go to SFIA to get you into more of the details that you need for your governance framework. Okay. So that's the first one. We just talked about process just now. Okay. The next component that I think is important, which is an important ingredient, is what we call our people, our skills, and our competencies. Here's what's interesting. So remember, every one of those 40 governance and management objectives is broken down into all these components. So what is COBIT going to tell us about the people, skills, and competencies area? Right? It's a crucial, what I call that ingredient to my governance system. Remember, you can have all the policies and the processes you want, but if you don't have the right skills and the maturity levels that you need for this, your governance system is going nowhere, and you're going to give me a call and say, my governance program isn't working, I need help, and I can guarantee you this is going to be the first component we look at. So, of course, they're required for our good decisions and how we execute all of the other components. And as I mentioned before, SFIA is one of the primary references for this governance component called people, skills, and competencies. Okay. All right. So let's move on just a little bit. Let's go back and we'll take a look. That was one of those 7 ingredients we had. So far we said in my governance system, I'm linking to my people, skills, and competencies, of course, my processes, right? And we have the people, skills, and competencies. Okay. So I know that went quick. So let's move on a little bit. And I'm going to show you what this actually looks like in the COBIT framework. So obviously I can't provide this document to you guys. And this is something you have to go out to the ISACA site to download. But this is what we call the governance and management objectives. Remember, we talked earlier, we have 40 of these things. The one we looked at was the people one. So let's go take a look and see what COBIT actually says about this. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I appreciate your patience while I get this up. Okay, so in COBIT, all of those 40 objectives does exactly what I'm going to show you here. We said this is APO 7, Managed Human Resources. We talked about that earlier. I showed you on the slide. I have a description and a purpose statement. One of the things that they do provide is the link to what's called the Goals Cascade. The intent here is to not teach the Goals Cascade to you, but I presume most people understand the whole idea of cascading goals from the enterprise through different functions of the organization. Okay, so I'm going to skip that part for now. Not that it's not important, but we really want to jump into the details of how people play a role here. Remember, every one of my processes, we're talking about a component called process. Remember, there are 7 of them. Process is the first one. And what I said was there are 6 of these practices. Here's practice number 1, APO 701, acquire and maintain appropriate staffing. One of the things COBIT does is it gives me a description of this thing. Now, if you're an auditor, by the way, what you're looking at, APO 07.01, is a control objective for you. If you're looking at this from a control perspective, it's going to give me some example metrics. Of course, it gives me a set of activities that support my ability to meet this practice. It gives me capability, suggested capability levels, whole other discussion right there. Here is where this thing is huge. Right below this, it says relate under the process component, related guidance. And under related guidance, what you'll see right here, there's 2 references to related guidance for this. One is COSO and the other one SFIA. Now you might notice it says version 6 2015. You guys know that SFIA is well beyond version 6 right now. But what really happens is, when these frameworks are launched, we have to put that kind of that stake in the ground, because as soon as a framework gets updated, of course, any framework that gets referenced is going to be updated, pretty soon afterwards. So you can always map between the current version and version 6. So I'm just going to run through a couple things very quickly for you. So remember, we said there was a couple of those practices we had. Next, we have practice number 2, which is identify key personnel. Of course, I have my metrics, my activities, my capability levels, and my related guidance. There's my SFIA guidance there. We'll show you how this plays a role here in a minute. There's APO 7.03. Just going to scoot down. This is still in the process component. Of course, you notice, actually, this is pretty interesting. Maintain the skills and competencies of personnel. There's my activities. But look, there's several references out there that we have. And of course, SFIA. And there's the detailed reference there. So I just wanted you to kind of see how COBIT as an information and technology governance framework is linking other frameworks back in. So that's under the process component. Let me scoot down here All right, give me a second. Here's my organizational structures component. Remember, that's one of my ingredients to my governance system. And it's given me a sample RACI chart here, right? Again, this is not a standard. This is not legislation. It's a suggestion. To finish up all of my other components, we have a component that we called information. Right? This one is actually huge. What this does, it takes each one of those components and shows me information flows that should be coming in and going out. This is an actual huge opportunity for somebody who's really looking at not just roles and not just competencies, but responsibilities when it comes to information artifacts coming into processes and going out. So it takes that for each one of those practices. There's APO 701, 02, there's 03. And again, remember, there were several of those, but that's the information component. Hang in there. We're getting close to being done with this piece. There's my component: people, skills, and competencies. So what COBIT also says for this process is we have to have some skills out there. And again, this isn't an all-inclusive set. This is kind of your starter kit. And it says we need to have these skills that you see here on the left with the references to any one of those related guidance. And of course, you see SFIA showing up quite a bit there. You also might see the ECF, e-competence framework as well. Okay. All right. So that's kind of nice. So when I'm setting up my governance program, that's very helpful for me, as well as understanding, of course, my policies that I have in place, my culture, ethics, behavior, and my services, infrastructure, and applications. Folks, I wanted you to see that because I wanted you to understand how COBIT plays a big role in helping me identify those ingredients I need, and also says, hey, here's another framework you need to be aware of because it's going to be vital to your governance system success. Which takes me to the skills framework for the information age. You guys know, right? Whether you're an organization that is looking at skills across the entire organization, you're planning your own professional journey, your government, your private, it doesn't matter. Folks, I'm telling you, this framework right here is your go-to reference for people, skills, and competencies, especially if I'm building my governance system. Because remember, if we don't have that ingredient, we will fail at delivering the expected benefits that we expect to from our investments. So you guys are familiar, hopefully, with the skills framework for the information age. Of course, it's really become what I think is the global reference for these skills and competencies, especially in the world where everybody is going digital. This has been recently updated with some very, very unique and very applicable skills, globally accepted. You guys wouldn't believe how many people actually reference this, but what they don't do is consider this part of their overall ecosystem for their frameworks. I'm going to show you guys what this looks like here in just a couple seconds. Of course, you can get information for free out there. Of course, contact Skills TX and get any of the information on their website. Really good stuff out there for you. Okay, so with SFIA, a couple things here. Well, let me move this forward a little bit. There we go. And you guys know, there's a lot of pieces to this, right? So we're trying to really link these skills and competencies in 6 real key areas. Of course, we've got what's called strategy and architecture. We've got change and transformation. We've got development and implementation, relationships and engagement, delivery and operation, people and skills. And then, of course, you see here at the bottom that talks about those levels of responsibility: follow, assist, apply, and so on. Again, the intent here is not to teach you about the framework. I'm going to show you how I put these together in my governance ecosystem, but this is absolutely awesome. You guys know that when you are looking at your knowledge, you're looking at your skills and competencies as somebody in the governance space, I want to know what the measuring stick is, and that's what this skills management maturity model is all about. No surprises. You got a 1 through 5 kind of scale. Folks, I'm not going to walk through these in detail, but I want you to be aware of this because I'm going to show you how I used this to help me link the maturity of my digital skills inside of my governance system. Okay. So anyway, a lot of information on that. So basically, what this is showing is pretty much a list of organizations that use SFIA. You guys know this is just a limited list. There are so many organizations that use this that may not recognize it as a full framework to leverage benefits delivery for them. They may just reference it at some point. But I think it's enough to show you that this is a pretty powerful tool. And here's why we're here, is how I put these frameworks together. So next couple slides, get ready. This is going to get kind of deep for you, okay? So in my organization, where we were able to leverage both COBIT and SFIA, this organization, we had different what I called altitudes of my governance system or my frameworks. So if you look at the top, we've got what's called enterprise governance. In an enterprise governance space, this is my board of directors and my executive steering committees. What we're trying to do is we're trying to balance this thing called performance and conformance, which again, you guys know that if I'm so overly heavy conformant, it may suffer on the performance side. So from a framework perspective, for the performance, we looked at the balanced scorecard. On the conformance side, we were looking at different areas such as COSO, which is the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, and King 4, which was a governance standard out of South Africa. Okay, so take to the next step. Here's what happens is now I have to govern enterprise IT. This is where COBIT comes in, because what COBIT now does is it provides this link between enterprise governance and how I'm governing enterprise information and technology. And I think what happens is most organizations don't have this. They go right. Actually, what they'll do is they'll go from here right down to frameworks, because every framework is going to save your company, but you need to know where it fits. So what COBIT does is helps me look at those objectives. And right there are my governance components. Remember those ingredients we had in the organization. And now here's the important part. I've got so many frameworks out there, it is not even funny. Have you guys ever suffered from framework overload? Probably. But here's the trick, is you can have multiple frameworks, as you can see right here. But what we do is I can link SFIA to basically my people and skills and my competencies, and I can link that, right, through my entire governance system. I know this is a confusing slide to look at, but my whole point here is this is not a single view, right? You can have multiple, right? I had ITIL, I had TOGAF, we had PMBOK Prince 2, NIST and ISO, right? We had those, but we didn't need every part of every one of the frameworks out there. What I really want you guys to get is how you can link those together. So here's what we looked at is of course at the top I have my governance framework, and I need to map that to my people and skills. How do these things fit together? Number one is we determined our tailored governance system. We use COBIT for that. It was one of those things you looked at a little bit earlier. They were called design factors. They're if you're not familiar with them, just go out. You can do a search on YouTube or go to the ISACA site. Right, it has some awesome information on how you determine which of the governance and management objectives are more or less important for you. Right, you don't have to focus 100% on everything. You may have to focus 100% on a couple things and lessen that on other areas. So now we can prioritize those. And here's the key thing. Once I know which of my governance and management objectives are the most important, now I can go and I can identify those people skills, those competencies that I have to have in place to support the objectives. Folks, this is where the missing ingredient usually comes up, because most of us go right to the process and right to the policy. Okay, so what we will also do is assess that maturity. We saw that digital maturity scale a little bit earlier, right? So that way I can know a measuring stick to how well my skills are linking up to my governance system. And of course, this is continuous. Okay, and I know we're getting pretty close on time because we only want to do 30 minutes, but we'll close this up with some of what I call my tips and tricks for you guys. So first, consider people, skills, and competencies as a critical ingredient. Think back to that. If you are preparing a meal and you miss one ingredient, that result is going to be underwhelming. And imagine if you're a business and you're a chef and you forget salt, your customers may never come back. So the whole key thing here is don't forget about all those components, but people, skills, and competencies is going to be one of the critical success factors for you. So therefore, what I say is synchronize COBIT and SFIA. Right? I'm not telling you to go adopt COBIT top down, bottom up, SFIA. What I'm saying is create that ecosystem of frameworks where you know that SFIA is just one of several frameworks in this family that you have, but focus on what's important to the organization. And I can guarantee people, skills, and competencies will be a factor for every one of those areas that you've got. So that's kind of a key point there. So understand your skills requirements and, of course, your maturity. And that's where SFIA comes in, because a lot of times we don't know that. How often have you onboarded somebody or you've started a new organization and they say, yeah, we're not quite sure exactly what you need to do, but, create a training plan for yourself, right? Well, without a reference point like this, sometimes that's very difficult. And what I want to make sure is that if I have the skills to meet my goals, that will help my boss meet her goals, her boss meet his goals, and so on. This is kind of like a goals cascading, but, taking a look at it from individual skills and competencies. So know what those skills and requirements are, because you guys know that a process can be beautiful. A policy can be spotless. But if you don't have the right skills and competencies to support that, all that work is useless for you, okay? And then finally, of course, this is an iterative approach, which basically means it's not one and done. And this kind of goes along the whole lines of continuous improvement. I can tell you this is what we generally did in our organization is we did 3-month improvement cycles. And so at the 3-month mark, of course, we did an annual strategy and kind of understanding how all of our components fit into our governance system. But we did a reassessment of our skills and our competencies on a 3-month basis. Why is that? Think about it. This is a high velocity environment that we're working in. What can change tomorrow? Right? Your business strategy could change tomorrow. The threat landscape could change tomorrow, right? Political, social factors can change. Your ability to source and third parties can change. So many things can change on a regular basis. I want to be real careful to say we did this every 3 months and that's only when we did it. But those were kind of the official evaluation points. But if something in our environment changed before our 3-month review was due, we would do a review then. So it's kind of, if you kind of think for folks who may be continual improvement, say ITIL with the continual improvement model, COBIT with the COBIT implementation model, it is a cyclic review, and I can't emphasize that enough. Okay. Well, I know I got started just a little bit late, and I had a lot of information that I threw at you guys in just 30 minutes. But what I want to do is thank everybody for joining us for this short webinar to talk about COBIT and the skills framework for the information age. A couple of parting comments for you, right? Well, what I'm not telling you is to go adopt an entire framework as it is out of the book. You guys know you cannot open a framework guide, COBIT, ITIL, SFIA, right? You can't open it and thumb through this on a 30-minute flight or a 1-hour flight and say, aha, now I get it, right? You have to spend some time looking at these. So, of course, you guys know I do endorse training. And in our organization, we did a lot of training around how we looked at and evaluated our knowledge, skills, and the abilities of the people in our organization. My parting comment, don't forget your most important ingredient to your governance system. That's your people, skills, and competencies. And the framework you look at for that is SFIA. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions on SFIA, reach out to my friends at Skills TX. I'd be happy to help you out as well. And that's all I've got, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining. You just went through a master's level course in 30 minutes. John, I'm going to send this back over to you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. That's incredibly valuable. Appreciate you taking the time for us, Mark. And the time to do this is now. But what I want to finish with, I mean, we certainly used the word framework there. Maybe the first person who attended can tell us how many times we used the word framework in 30 minutes, gets a free training class or something like that. But the thing that really I loved about COBIT, I spent 15, 20 years since we first met in ITIL, COBIT, ISO, acronym soup world that is frameworks, is that SFIA is just a dictionary. It doesn't tell you what to do, right? You're using COBIT to tell you what you need to do to complete the objectives, where SFIA is literally a common language so that
That's a great point.
a skill is, and most of the people who have a skills inventory today, if you said, hey, show me your skills inventory, they're going to show you all the different software and hardware systems that exist in their enterprise architecture and all the certifications that the people in their IT organization that has to support them. Well, those people actually have skills in project management or IT governance. You might know COBIT. COBIT isn't a skill. COBIT is an IT governance skill, and then SFIA would tell you that COBIT is a skill attribute. What are the things that you know that are special to the process of IT governance or business relationship management or change and configs? So, it's really a dictionary. So that's what I really loved about SFIA, is that it wasn't going out and trying to sell people on another framework. It was, this is the magic ingredient, as you called it, that makes it all make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, everybody, for your time. We're going to shut it down, and have a great day. Night.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.